dramatic effect, really, though. Really, it is. Mm. It is lovely to be here with all of you. And I want to start a little time with a poem that, for probably the last 4 or 5 years, right? Yeah, man, time goes. Has probably just sit with me. The poem is titled Traveler. It's by David White with a Y. So if this tickles your fancy, you can find it. The heart's a close in horizon that holds all distance but gives no explanation. To the tidal scour of life, taking us on and away from the home we know so well, tearing us from the place we tried to inhabit so firmly, the anchorage, all gone, the faces all changed, only the run and flow of a life moving far beyond even the eternal voices of those we love. As if God were all arrival and understood only through awaited tidal anticipation. As if we were meant to know what we wanted to know only tomorrow. As if we were, after all, from the very beginning, born far beyond ourselves. Our whole being, a traveling onward ghost that sees itself only in looking back. Always just about to find a home, always a hair's breadth away from arrival, always about to find the arms that will never fall away. A self as touch and go. And a breath, and an essence hardly ever held, and a visitation able to become real only through the miracle, fully contained. Shift this for that. Uh, a decade ago, a decade and some years ago, I actually sat in a Ruby Tuesdays, I think, with Nate over there, accompanied by peers and engaged by a representative from Bethany Theological Seminary. Now, her name I forget, and I know she hasn't worked there in some time. My mind has likely skewed her voice, but remember, she asked a simple question. When do you feel closest to God? Now, the common answer, the majority answer, was in singing, in worship, and in praise. As a musician seated among musicians, not the one who likes to speak last in group pop quizzes, I had time to consider my answer. Music, and in musical praise, is not when I felt closest to God. No surprise for anyone who heard my previous sermon. Now, my answer was at the point of change. The end of seminary. That invited introspection and it brought me to the precipice of change. Drawing deep into my heart, I found an emptiness born from years lived in Gesellschaft, a German term contrived to contrast Gemeinschaft, which is their word for deep community known in a singular place. Gesellschaft, simply then, is that belonging one feels across multiple places. It's in a transient sense. And at that time, well, I felt as I belonged everywhere, nowhere. I'd not traveled as far and as wide as some, but I had traveled far enough and wide enough, having lived in those places literally just long enough for roots to connect with the soil. Temporary communities became me, and in the May of 2021, I did a bold thing, posted on Facebook. Not something I seldom do. If you go and look at it, it will be chronicled by happy birthdays and hey, I moved. That's it. But this one was just a little different because therein was a stated resolve. I was going to make the high desert of the Snake River Valley my home, again, returning to the people that I ministered the year before and continue forward and the mysteries of the divine reflected across that great land. Hi, I'm here tonight. What can I say? Times change, as do we, as do what we discern of God's will, God's movements in and through and for our living. Call is a layered word. And we believe in a God that calls us on many levels, do we not? Church, congregation, creation, and ourselves, we are called to reach where we are now. God calls the entirety of our lives, and in moments, to specific action. Vocation, our word to describe that particularity of our call, is multifaceted. Occupation, home life, relationships, and other efforts all factor into that word, vocation. Some aspects are universal, such as loving one another. Hebrew scripture, gospel, the epistles, the innate human soul, they all account for it. We know this. But like those specifics to us, they require a little more discernment. And discernment is challenging because it's a lensed process. We bring our wants and desires, skills, prior accomplishments, perhaps trauma, current, past, and hoped future circumstances. All of those juxtaposed to the hopes and the fears and the needs from our loved ones and our employers and in others that we may labor with. All before we ask, what next, God? Oh, and of course, there's that matter that we want to survive, and there's that we might want to thrive, and there's the matter of interpretation. Interpreting the things that serve as our compass points along the way, such as passages, gut intuition, words of wisdoms, and those curious aha moments that pop up from time to time. Discernment is a multifaceted process, and it involves drawing in as much inward as it does including community. So today, I have no deep dive into any one particular passage. I know Connor read one of two, really, that we'll highlight today. These two have been compass points over the last decade and some. And the first is Genesis 12. Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse. And in you all of the families of the earth shall be blessed. So Abram went, as the Lord told him. I'm of a particular mind that passages, as they reinforce calls, don't always need to be the one-to-one equivalent. I say that because no great nations have been made of me yet. And whether my name is great, I will let that be up to you, what you feel about the name Steve in general or me as a human. But there are a couple of bits, particularly the two elements of being a blessing and leaving that land of my kindred. They have for a long time beat in my heart. And those two pieces have aligned with other voices of wisdom in life circumstances. Having oriented me from Big Rapids to Richmond, Indiana. It's wrong this morning, so from Big Rapids to like Richmond, Indiana, from like Richmond, Indiana, all the way to Nampa, Idaho, there and back again. This morning I had it, it was really confusing. Like Abram, in each of these moves, I was surrounded with circumstances and the question of purpose. Surrounding my first move to Richmond was closing of the Lost and Found Church, my first commission, my first employed ministry. And I was also going into my second year of seminary, and I was left with a choice between remaining in Big Rapids, intending to the remaining Standing in the Gap chapter up that way, or make my way southward and attend Bethany on site. Community voices from the church and Bethany, as well as family, they aided in that decision, noting my tendencies to work better in person. God's call to Abram guided me again, and I moved to Idaho for the first of my 2 internships. My only prior experience with the state of Idaho was in my social geography class. But as we were studying the state, I just spent a lot of time hovering over it in Google Maps and thought it was really pretty. Maybe I want to go someday. It's a fact I remembered after the move. The pastor of the Nampa congregation and I had shared only literally 2 conversations before my gut said I need to learn from this person. And again, I had a choice because I could have returned here for those 9 months. I eventually did after that. The community voices contributed again. Well, they were a little more mixed. Some were all for it. Some were jaded of the frequent moves in such a short period of time, and they just wanted to know, is something going to stick? I couldn't argue my own gut, too, recognizing the mystery contained in knowing so little of Nampa, of Idaho, of this congregation. In the mystery, I knew there was only possibility. So, what? God hadn't called Abram into the unknown without purpose. That's important. God had called Abram to be a blessing. Then, and I would argue still very much now, was gleaning that God was calling to be a student as well as a blessing. Now my life is different, as is my relationship with that particular passage. 2023 is coming to a close, and as I look back to look ahead, I sense no call to go to some land not of my own. I'm in Michigan. Not for a while. Though I still find some of those nearest moments with God at the point of change, there's something to be gained in communal and geographical familiarity, in building community where I am in Gemeinschaft rather than Gesellschaft. As for that second compass point, as Connor read, as for you, be sober in everything, endure suffering, and do the work of an evangelist. Carry out your ministry fully. That passage is inscribed on a Bible dictionary that this congregation gave me over 10 years back when I first got licensed. It is the passage that at that same service, the pastor of that church plant, the Lost and Found, spoke on to me, commissioning me, admonishing me to embody as we looked ahead at what might be. I've returned to that passage in tandem with Abram's call and apart. I leaned in on it when I considered stepping into those shoes as he was stepping down from that congregation. I leaned into it when I considered moving back to Idaho at the end of my seminary career. And I considered it when moving back here, January 6th. Fulfill your ministry. There is a gap of time since I've pondered what that is. After a decade and 2 years change, I'd settled for that being largely presence in people. To be an active presence in the life of those led to hang near the fringes, step into the pulpit when necessary, when asked. Last year, I penned the intent, even the yearning, to return to the waters of spiritual inquiry and imagination. Now, my occupation is part of my vocation, that I sit with people and equip them to live as much as skills provide the means for an abundant life. That much is clear. was at a point of change. Moving back, I had every possibility opened, even more Bernays' encouragement to lean into God's movement and not be so caught up with just finding a new job in Idaho. See what might happen if I applied out this way. And it was a curious thing. For all of the opportunity to apply to spiritual jobs, I found myself in the similar fields that have been up there. But those are stories more in depth for another day. It's been a year now since I underwent the familiar ritual of my possessions being downsized into a car. The engine turned over and I moved. 3 days, including that short leg from Nampa to Salt Lake City, is the length that I traveled before my tires graced the shores of Lake Michigan again. And those miles across eastbound I-80, they mark the minutes, the seconds, the hours lived in the shift from this to that. Everything contained, every possibility, every mystery, every hope, every fear, every labor to be labored, every hug to be given, and every failure to be failed. I was leaving and I was returning. And so my mind descended further to that close-in horizon that was my heart. I think that's where every act of discernment truly begins. I think in that liminal space is where your mind begins. Send in your own heart. And here we all are at the point of change. The calendar soon flips over. The New Year's invites celebration and reflection. We look back to see forward. We anticipate resolution. We anticipate revelation. We anticipate coming action. The shift begins, containing everything we are, were, hope to be. Me, and the reason really why I wrote 4 other pages worth of stuff, really just to get to this. I want to return to those waters of spiritual inquiry and imagination. For all my prayers this year, all my questions of what next God, all my attempts to navigate passages highlighting here and there, I confess, I found myself less engaged in the faith that I claim. Feel free to hold me to that, by the way. What about you? This has been a pretty light sermon. No grand dive into any one narrative piece in Scripture, because I really only had that moment with those 2 compass points of my own as I look forward. So what have you? I'm going to leave you with 2 questions for your tables tonight. First, asked to me long ago, when do you feel closest to God? And secondly, what has served as your compass points as you've discerned God's movements in and for your life? That's all I got. For listening.